Yeah.
All right, here we go. It is April 2nd, Thursday, April 2nd. Matt and Mary Beth here, ready to do shift tactic number 7, price ahead of the market, seller pricing strategies in our shift book. So typically where we start is by reading the little quote at the top of the section. I can't pronounce this person's name, but it's by Ari de Geis. They wrote, "The ability to learn faster than your competitors may be the only sustainable competitive advantage." And I think that really hits, the nail on the head in terms of what this chapter is delivering, in terms of the conversations you need to have with your sellers to be able to price ahead of the shift.
Absolutely. We were talking yesterday on a call with the region about some of the steps that were made in advance without, and my coach had said the same thing as well, is we would rather, make some of the calls that we made and be like, that was a little excessive and not need it, than to not have made the calls
Mm-hmm.
and then look back at history and said, man, we could have done something about it a month before it actually came. And I'm, speaking to making changes because of the situation we're going through now with the coronavirus.
Yep.
And yet I think that that's just a really good principle, a really good principle that you should have in your business, is you're always casting the vision, you're always forecasting what's happening. Numbers are indicators. If you're monitoring your numbers, and we could talk a little bit about what numbers, you should be able to predict that something's coming. So we did discuss on previous conversations that we were headed for a shift. We didn't know when it was going to show up. And this was extremely sudden. This was not a gradual, this was a sudden. And I do believe that we're positioned to have the conversations that we need to have. And yet we are still dealing with the uncertain as to where the pricing on the market will be when this lifts. Matt, something we do need to, just talk about that we wouldn't be talking about on a typical shift dissection of the book, is that our economy is kind of come to a halt.
Completely.
And there was no gradual with that. 80% of our Americans are not working, which means the income, the unemployment, we are talking about a $2 trillion rescue may turn into a $6 to $8 trillion rescue. And so with those type of things that are going on in the economy, we're in this together, Mr. Seller, and we need to be on top of the indicators that will affect our pricing, and ultimately what a buyer is going to be willing to pay and a seller is willing to sell for. Yep. And so when we get into this a little bit, I'll turn it over to you, but when we get into this a little bit, that's the deciding factor of whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. Is where's the demand? Is the demand for the seller to get a buyer, or is the demand for the buyer to get a house? And so we still, because of interest rate, may see, even though everything would point to economy is all upside down and people aren't working, we still may see influx of a certain sector of our market buying and selling once this lifts, or even during.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think, with that being said, as you're saying, the economic conditions are constantly changing right now, day to day. I think one thing that I kind of wanted to take a step back before we dove deeper into this chapter, because you mentioned it before, and I don't want to throw you for a curveball, but I kind of wanted to highlight, for our agents out there who are going through this shift, and we're going to be talking about seller pricing strategies. When we're looking at studying the market, and you've mentioned that before, people have time right now to be able to be at home, be able to really study the market, be able to look at the MLS, be able to look at all of that. I kind of want to talk to you just about, what does studying the market actually mean, like right now, and what number should we be looking at? Because, I've taken this class before when I was in the Morristown office, and I remember I was actually looking back at some of my notes on this chapter, and one of the things that came up in terms of studying the market were the activity index and the absorption rate. So those were two things, obviously in addition to knowing how many listings were coming on, how many under contracts there are, and how many pendings. Ultimately,
Well,
yeah,
those numbers dictate those two factors.
yeah. So
So go ahead.
when I'm looking at the absorption rate, so when I'm looking back at my notes, I wrote down the absorption rate will tell you how many months of inventory you have on the market. It demonstrates how long it would take to sell all the homes on the market if no other homes were to come on the market. So the formula for that would be the number of active homes on the market divided by the number of homes sold in the last 30 days. So those are some numbers that you can start looking at to see what what the absorption rate is in some of these areas.
Sure. And I would, just to reiterate what you just said, is it's the number of active homes, and you put that over the number of homes that have closed in the last 30 days. Some would argue that you would put the number of under contracts. Okay. And so these are a couple different ways to look at it.
Well,
in that when something goes under contract, it comes off the market.
yeah. And I was going to say, I think what you're also mentioning now is the activity index, which is the other note I have on my page, which is actives plus pendings divided by pendings gives you the activity index, which is ultimately
Correct.
the number of properties going under contract compared to the number of active properties on the market.
Correct. And so and that's where I think we're going to have some, well, let's just see what happens, because understand if more sellers come off and more buyers take themselves out of the market and we're left with the same proportionate amount of buyers and sellers, we may be in the same type of temperature absorption ratio that we are in right now or were in previously in 30 days ago. So it's really going to be watching those numbers. In our office, Matt, you and I have asked Allison, who deals with our communications, to communicate daily what our ticker is. So for those of you that are working in Morris and Passaic County, we are just tracking daily how many new listings are coming on, how many went under contract, and how many closed in the last 24 hours, so that we will be able to see when that is dipping. To a conversation that we had earlier in the week, we looked at our showing time drop off. And I believe the date we said was March 10th, was it? March 9th?
Maybe.
Okay. And so that's where literally showings went down. And we're starting to see a little peak back up. And we don't know, right? So in a week or 2 weeks, we should just watch those numbers every day. If it's a town, a neighborhood, a community, a county, track something every day so that when people are asking you, how's the market? And maybe you want to do a comparison of two. Maybe you're looking at Morris County compared to Passaic, or two towns inside of Passaic. That's going to get you some attention. If you can talk to your customers or your sphere of influence and talk about how those numbers are showing up in our local market, you're going to have a better chance that when you put out the direct offer, like we spoke about in previous tactics, the direct offer of contact me to find out what your home's worth in today's market, you're going to get a better response if you've made enough deposits. Then you can ask for a withdrawal, which would be, hey, take an appointment with me. Hey, give me a call. But I think we're also in that time right now where we need to make a lot of deposits, people, so that we position ourselves in the mind of the client when they can do business with us.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned that we kind of touched on yesterday with Megan is one of the things that separates us as agents.
Wasn't she just awesome?
Yes, she was great, and I totally will have her back again. Yeah, she was fantastic. And one of the things we talked about was just that we can be super local, whereas the Zillows, the Realtor.coms, those websites really just giving you national overviews, whereas people, especially now in the shifting market, want that hyper-local information. And it's so important for you to study the market and know these numbers that we're talking about right now, because this is what's going to separate you from everyone else. And I will say, a lot of agents don't understand these numbers, and I think it's important that now more than ever, when you are at home, to really take that time to dive in.
Well, and like I've said before on our other calls, is this is leveling the playing field for everybody. Everybody's got the same amount of time. We're all stuck in our houses right now. So I don't want anybody having a limiting belief that, oh, I didn't do that before this happens. Well, maybe your situation was different before. Maybe you had to go into a part-time job. Maybe you were just pulled a little bit with your clients and coming into the office. Now you're finding those commuting hours back to yourself, and you do have the time. I challenge you to find the time to do that type of research. And so what Megan was talking about yesterday is key. And I remember there was an agent, his name is Spencer Friedman, and he is from Manalapan, New Jersey. And he was brand new a few years ago. However, I watched him on the back of a deck of this $1 million property in Manalapan, and he said something so smart, and it was what got me as a Manalapan resident or somebody who wanted to maybe move to Manalapan. He said, come visit me where we have all the space and we can entertain, and we're the closest to Route 9 for the $1 million price tag. Yep. Now, that means nothing to you, I'm sure, or to anybody who is listening and has no idea what Manalapan is. But when you're coming into Monmouth County, Route 9 comes in, and most people want to stay as close to the New York corridor as possible. Well, most of the homes that were built in Manalapan that fit that price tag or that purchaser is in a southern part of the city, which puts another 15, 20, 30 minutes on a drive for somebody one way if they're commuting into the city. So that was a real great shout out to Spencer Friedman. That was a really great hyper local piece of information that only you, the local agent, could have.
Yep.
And so how would you know that is if you were really studying where the $1 million properties were in the specific town that you're working or the specific area that you're working, because they're not everywhere. To Megan's point, she was talking about townhomes that have a community pool.
Yep.
That's probably not going to be found out there in your general knowledge of what's going on in Wayne Township. So
yeah,
go ahead.
No, you're right. No, I think you're very right. And I think what we're just emphasizing is the importance of knowing your local area, because that's the information that's going to separate you from everyone else. And I think now as we shift gears, as we talk about this chapter and we're looking at things shifting into a buyer's market where there's a limited supply of buyers or there's less listings on, we're looking at the window of opportunity, or more listings rather. We're looking at the window of opportunity, which is where a lot of people are coming on as sellers and saying, the conversations are going to be different now, because if you're coming on the market overpriced, which we're going to get into, it's going to keep coming down and down and down, and you're going to net less. So do you want to talk a little bit about page 137 where they talk about the window of opportunity?
Sure. All right. So the window of opportunity in our typical market is going to be in the first 10 days of the listing, guys. So typically, and before the last shift, when I personally learned how to sell real estate, 2004, 2005, it was every month the price was going up, 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 up. Then all of a sudden we shifted, and so when the price was going up, 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 we could play with it a little bit. When we had our last shift, we realized that pricing ahead of the market would give us the best opportunity to gain the most lookers. Now, looking at the window of opportunity, to Matt's point right now, is a little challenging to say what is that window. I would say first impressions. You only have one chance to make first impressions. And so what happens is if you come out on the market and you're not received, because the market will speak, you're not going to have anybody want to see the house. You're not going to have anybody inquire on the house. I mean, at this point in the game, we could easily say that agents that are part of NAR, that are realtors, have a nice platform of syndication, that our listings do get the exposure to most buyers that are in the market. Mm-hmm. And so to say that you would have your property out there for 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, and not have one inquiry or one showing would absolutely say that the market was rejecting your price. Yep. Now, I want us to also think about something, and we definitely going to need to finish this topic tomorrow,
Yeah.
But I want you to think about something is, we know if something's overpriced. When we say something's overpriced, it's because we don't see the value in it for that price.
Yeah.
So it's very unlikely that we would go back to something that we made that quick judgment and said, no, they're asking too much for that.
Yeah.
And so that window of opportunity is just that. It's that time where a buyer would first see that property and go, I don't want to miss the opportunity to get into that house
Yeah.
because that may my need.
Yeah.
Now, in all markets, we have a window of opportunity. How aggressively we price, how our condition is, and what our other terms are is going to dictate where the price needs to be in order to attract the buyer.
Yeah, well, I think two things I want to say to what you just mentioned, because I think that's what you said is exactly right. I want to look at page 138, which is this graph, which I think would be very powerful to show any sellers when you're going on a listing appointment, which is essentially saying sellers with a price reduction need 2 to 3 times longer to sell, potentially delaying their move and increasing their carrying costs. So if you price it right up front, ultimately it's going to be quicker to sell, and it may, you're going to, we're going to get into more of the financials of it in a little bit, but if you don't price it right to start, it's going to take 2 to 3 times more for it to actually sell.
Well, and let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
If people are, like, let's say you do have some lookers and they don't put offers out though.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to think about the consumer that goes to the car lot. Okay, you go and shopping for a car, and there's 3 of the exact same body car, same model car, 3 of the exact same color. They have, let's say they all have a sunroof, but one has moonroof, and one has leather interior, and one has the amazing tires that you want. One has a stereo system that, quite frankly, I don't care for. Maybe the next guy who's coming to the lot does.
Yeah.
And so now all 3 of those cars are priced differently because of what that seller thinks is valuable to them instead of what the buyer may find valuable. And when a buyer looks at all 3, they say, well, this one has leather, and this one has the nice tires, and this one has bare bones, and that's how I'm going to rank them. So I want you to think about that when you have a consumer viewing your property, whether it's virtually or in person. If they're not raising their hands and they have seen it, they are comparing it to what else is out there for the same dollar, and they're making an assumption based on what their needs are, if this is worth it for them.
Mm-hmm.
I want everybody to understand that, and when you're explaining that to a seller, you have to tell a seller to take no offense to what buyers need, want. It's a personal journey, and if they see value in it, they're going to pay it. But it's not your value, it's their value.
Yeah. No, and I think to what you're saying, and in line with that, I just wanted to read, because I love this section on page 139 where he says, as listing agents, you are making an observation and a forecast. Gary writes, the observation is the science and the forecast is the skill. Observation of current pricing is a science that requires a thorough, rational, fact-based analysis, which is what we were talking about. Forecasting is an acquired skill, an inexact ability to predict market direction and speed. And I think, the pages that are to come that we're going to talk about now, direction and speed and timing is critical, because having a pulse on the market day in, day out is going to be the only way you're going to be able to price things right, because things are going to change very quickly, quicker than they would, or as they have been.
Yeah, and we don't have our data yet, really, because if you want to even go a step further and do your research in what is happening right now, you would actually be calling the agents that have properties under contract to ask them, did they fall in 5% of asking? Did they come in close to asking? Because we are seeing properties go under contract, absolutely, hands down. If we have sellers with, needs to sell, we are seeing some sellers be a little aggressive on what they're willing to take.
Yeah.
So when those prices hit the closed data, that's going to change what the CMA, what the comparative market analysis says to our clients as to what the perceived value of their home is. And that's when we might even get into some appraisal issues, even if a buyer does want to pay what a seller is demanding, so
Absolutely.
we
And
really have to be on top of our numbers, because a lot is going to reveal itself in the next couple of weeks as to how to advise our clients and what kinds of conversations, news articles. The other thing is we need to inform our clients not only from us, but share with them some of the information, share with them the data that you're pulling from an MLS to pull them into the process, so it doesn't look like you're telling them, because who wants to be the agent that was wrong and cost them, no, Mr. Seller, this is our decision as to where we're going to price your home.
absolutely. And a couple things just to touch on real quickly. A lot of this, most agents know, but he writes in here, there are four main factors when comparing a property. It's location, size, amenities, and condition. So make sure when you're finding your comparables that you're using those metrics. He also writes, and I think this is very powerful at the end or at the top of page 141, because again, I like to look at the psychology of things, and I like to put myself in the position of the agent and the seller. That's just, I guess, my background in college. But he writes, the best way to truly serve a seller in a shift is to persuade them to outthink the other sellers they must compete against. So you're presenting this information, not only saying this is what your house is worth, but also isolating them and saying, look, you have to look at yourself versus other sellers on the market, because ultimately, if something is priced right, it'll be shown first. It's going to be the most talked about listing out there. It's going to be the first to receive offers, and it's going to be the most likely to sell. So you need to get your seller. You need to get inside the brain of the seller and say, okay, what do they need to understand? What information do they need to receive? So that way they realize that they have to outthink other sellers in order to compete against them. Otherwise, it's just going to sit on the market.
Yeah. So I was one of my mentors in real estate. I really was trained to tell through stories, right? Tell evidence-based stories that people can relate to. And that's why I just used that car lot example, where we could have different price tags for the same car. And now the reality is, if the price tag on all three of those cars with different amenities and they were the same, you'd still have different buyers attracted to each car because of the amenities that were in it. But nobody in their right mind is going to pay more for the bare model than they are going to pay for the guy with the leather. It's just common sense. So you absolutely need to know what your competition is. Another story that I was trained to kind of talk to, and I'm telling you guys, share these kinds of stories with sellers in a way that you say, Mr. Seller, all right, take it off the houses for a second. Let's think about if we were to walk on a car lot. You've bought a car before, right? And get them into understanding that the concept, rather than the house is somewhere they've raised their family. They personally put in that beautiful, blue ceiling or purple toilet. That was their choice, and they enjoyed it and they loved it. But it may not be other people's desire. Okay. So here's another story that I would say to a seller who was really having a hard time figuring out where they needed to be priced. I would ask them, if you were to go to the store and you were to look for a shirt, black shirt, here's a black simple shirt. And I found this shirt and I love it, and I love the feel of it and the color. It's black. And it's $80. And I get to the cash register and I look at the line, and to the left of me is a sales rack. It's a clearance rack. And there's another shirt that looks kind of similar. It's a short sleeve. It maybe has a different type of neck, and maybe it's not all the same material, but you know what? It does the job in the outfit. And I kind of like it, and it's half price. I'm probably going to go ahead and put that other shirt back to pick up the one that I see more value, or maybe not as much value, but the discount is amazing. So if you really want to be attracting somebody, you can also be thinking about that concept of offering them that clearance type price. That's one way to do it. The other concept with the sales rack is, if I go ahead and put this shirt back on the wrong size, if I go and put this shirt back in an extra small size, nobody's going to find that shirt. The right person is not going to find that shirt. And on the other hand, if I go and put this shirt in the 3X rack, they're not going to find it either. So finding the right size for the product that you're selling is so important, and pulling in the seller to that decision-making process. You're pricing a product. Let's take the emotional attachment to the home out of it.
Yep. Well,
so I know those are just some things that I want to share, in that this is how you tactically use some of these strategies, how you would use them with sellers.
Absolutely. And I think, what you were just saying, tomorrow we're going to talk more about the cost of overpricing a home. So when you're talking about your example with the shirts, in terms of pricing, we're going to talk tomorrow about overpricing a home. Tomorrow, I think this is honestly a good place to maybe pause for today, because I think tomorrow we'll talk about pricing at the market, behind the market, or ahead of the market. We'll talk about the cost of an overpriced listing. And we'll talk about, I really like pages 148 through, or no, not 148, 150 to 153, which is the conversations that you can have with a seller in terms of pricing in the market or out of the market, and the importance of pricing in the market. So there's some dialogues and scripts that you and I can maybe role play, and then really closing with the 7 maxim for pricing in a shifted market. So I think those will be good things for us to be able to cover in tomorrow's session.
So just going back to the shirt thing though, I want you to understand that if we overprice this shirt, it's going to end up on that clearance rack. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tomorrow is, Mr. Seller, do you want to end up on that clearance rack? And right now is the time to have a fierce conversation about where the numbers are and how do we position ourselves to be the next girl chosen, right? So just to give people something to have more knowledge on what we're going to talk about tomorrow, on our YouTube channel, there is a video that is saved in our playlist. It is a video by Jay Papazan, who is the co-author of this shift book. I believe it's called Why Some Homes Sell and Other Homes Sit.
Yes.
Take a look at it, watch it. I will tell you, hands down, you could probably just send that video off to your sellers and then say you're going to have a conversation. So we're here to help you. We're really excited to bring the rest of this book to you. But watch that and read the pages that go along with the tactic.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, and that'll be tomorrow. That'll be pages. We didn't really finish. So 141 to the end of the chapter, which I think was 156 maybe. Yeah, 156. So 141 to 156 is what we'll be covering tomorrow. So.
Oh, you're welcome, Nita. You're welcome.
You're welcome, Nita. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow at 11. So we'll see you then. Right, bye, guys.